I'm really looking forward to this program today. I've looked over the agenda, and it being your 10th year, I think it's just amazing that you've done so well. It takes a lot of work and determination to sustain a professional organization in today's helter-skelter world. There just doesn't seem to be enough time to do all these things, and many of our young people are not joining professional associations like they were doing 20 years ago. So I would say congratulations. I wish you all the best going forward. When I talked to Bob about the program and he mentioned the theme to me, I had to think a little bit about this. How could I approach this? What could I contribute? Varying approaches in intelligence education. So as I began thinking about this, I thought, well, maybe there's two approaches I might take. The first of those was essentially look at the old military approach. We'd all heard so much about it in Washington, D.C. over the years. Essentially, it was preparing the troops for the last war. I was a Marine, and as a Marine in the 1950s, we practiced a lot landing on beaches. And then during the 1980s, the military spent a lot of time working on jungle warfare, except for one small group, and we'll talk about that later. I decided there really wasn't a lot in that approach to help me for this speaking engagement today, so I looked at a different approach. I've reviewed my own learning experience in my private sector career, where I've spent 25 plus years now. Much of our education there has been focused on training businessmen and women on how to collect and analyze open source intelligence. Very little on teaching them how to use it for business purposes. Early in my business intelligence career, I raised this dilemma with an old boss, Harry Rowan. Some of you may recognize the name. Harry was the chairman of the NIC when I was the NL for Science and Technology. And Harry had moved on to Stanford. He also had a position there at the Hoover Institute. And so I said, Harry, how can we begin to teach business people how to use intelligence? And he said, well, let me think about this a little bit. And he did. At Stanford, he really was very influential. He had a lot of contacts, and we both then proceeded to spend a lot of time with the business school to see if we could get a business intelligence course accepted as a part of their MBA program. Several years. In the end, Harry concluded that the academic world was not yet ready to accept intelligence as a business discipline. Now, this would have been in the late 1990s. There just wasn't room for it in a 2-year MBA program. Over the next 10 years, I and several others spent a lot of time with academic institutions, Wharton, MIT, Henley in the UK, all trying to find some way to get intelligence into a business-oriented program, but with no success. For the most part, business intelligence has been limited to the vendor-sponsored training courses. Some professional organizations, such as the Society of Competitive Intelligence Professionals, the Special Library Associations, and a couple of the for-profit organizations like Mark Lowenthal's Intelligence and Security Academy. And I'm a part of the Academy of Competitive Intelligence out of Boston, and we do some teaching of it, but it's not very much for the number of people involved. However, as you know, there's been several academic programs that have had some success. Bob just went over the Mercyhurst program, which is, quite frankly, astounding success. And more recently, Embry-Riddle. There are also programs in Sweden, France, and China. And depending on your definition of program, there are possibly several more focused on business or private sector intelligence education. So from the initial thought process, I concluded there was something to be learned from looking at both intelligence communities and how they should be thinking about training their future professionals. So that was the focus of my talk, educating the next generation of intelligence officers, government and business. Not to forget that footnote I mentioned when I was talking about the military training for the last war. During the 1980s, a friend of mine, Jerry Sullivan, part of the Defense Department Research and Engineering Group, told me about a small group of Marine officers that had approached them with the requirement for a totally different set of weapons technologies, ones that could be used in urban warfare. They were ready for the jungle and the beaches, but not the cities. So, as I talk this morning, I also want you to think about the types of world that your students will be practicing their intelligence craft in, and the kind of intelligence skills that they will need for that future. I want to speak a little bit about my objectives and forces of change going forward for that 10 years. My principal objective here this morning is to cause you, the members of the International Association of Intelligence Education, to begin thinking and preparing to educate the next generation of intelligence professionals for the global world of 2020 and beyond. One that will be quite a bit different than the government-dominated intelligence communities we have all known and grown accustomed to. In addition, there are several forces of change that are working to reshape that future intelligence world. Let me describe two that I believe will be major determinants. First is an ongoing trend known as the privatization of intelligence. It began in the 1970s as business competition became more heated and international. Several multinational corporations and their leaders recognized that they, like governments, would need formal intelligence programs to compete successfully and even survive. In that vanguard were firms such as Motorola, Kodak, IBM, the global leaders in the chemical, pharmaceutical, and commercial sectors. This movement was also evident in Europe and Northeast Asia. By the mid-1980s, the business intelligence profession had grown to the size that it spawned its own professional society, the Society of Competitive Intelligence Professionals, known as SCIP. Today, SCIP has members and chapters in over 60 countries. Its membership has varied over the years from about 7,000 in the 1990s to around 3,000 today. An estimate of the total number of business competitive intelligence practitioners worldwide would probably be 10 to 100 times that number. That would include both part-time as well as full-time civilian intelligence professionals. This growth in numbers of private sector intelligence practitioners is worldwide. In some countries, it has been encouraged and assisted by their governments. China and France are prime examples. In most, however, it has been the business-driven phenomena. The second major force of change that appears to be reshaping the future intelligence world and governments worldwide, taking on more business and private sector intelligence issues, such as supply chain security, intellectual property protection, and even climate change as policy issues for intelligence. Although this trend is rather late to the scene, its force vector is clearly moving national intelligence communities into areas and disciplines that require government intelligence professionals to understand and learn more about private sector organizations and their operations and their strategies. For the most part, government intelligence education and training has not begun to address these types of private sector issues. Except for a few universities such as Mercyhurst, most academic educational institutions are not yet aware of these new government initiatives, and few are even prepared to address them. At the Academy of Competitive Intelligence, where I teach, we have only begun to contemplate the possibilities. I believe these two major forces of change will cause government intelligence professionals and private sector intelligence practitioners to increasingly focus on similar issues and challenges. Both will use common open sources for collection and similar analytical methodologies, but will produce results for different users with their specific public and private sector applications. This future intelligence world will be both similar and different, and you will be asked to prepare intelligence professionals for both. I believe we will need to think and prepare differently for this task, and we must not lose sight of the fact that those we are educating will be applying their craft in a different world, in a different time frame. They'll be facing new and unexpected intelligence challenges of a different nature. They'll be using new and innovative technology and tools, and most likely doing so in an entirely new and different intelligence community, one including both government and business intelligence professionals. Before going farther, I do want to describe a little bit about that new and evolving public-private sector intelligence community that I see forming. First of all, I don't see a formally combined public-private intelligence organization. For the most part, each sector will continue to operate separately. I do see both communities increasingly working on similar problems: threats to companies' intellectual property and supply chains, cyber and financial security issues, and more recently, government's growing concerns about their national infrastructure security and public health threats, including pharmaceutical production and supply. These are just a few of the types of new issues finding their way into national intelligence requirements worldwide. And I think you can see where it would be in the best interest of all for the two communities to work together on some aspects of these intelligence topics. Furthermore, as it becomes more and more evident that national security in today's global political world is a composite of a country's military security and its economic well-being, the responsibilities of the two intelligence communities worldwide will begin to converge. How and when, I'm not sure, but they will, possibly sooner than expected. As intelligence professionals, it behooves us to begin thinking more seriously about that future intelligence environment. As educators, it's not too soon to begin considering how we will train those future intelligence officers to work in that new intelligence world with overlapping concerns and interdependent responsibilities. Let me describe a possible scenario for that future intelligence environment, 2020 and beyond. Governments will, for the most part, still be viewing the world as made up of major geopolitical blocs: North and South America, Europe, Russia, the Middle East, with both friendly and threatening entities, Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, and China, and a new and challenging Africa. Military and political affairs will dominate their concerns, though energy and monetary issues will not be far behind. Global trade and industrial competition will become a national priority. International terrorism will continue to be a major national security concern, both domestically and abroad. For the business world, it will be made up of true multinational firms. We're just beginning to see these type of firms evolve now in France, as General Electric is becoming a part of the French industrial community. So we'll see these kinds of multinationals, and we'll see more state-owned enterprises, all competing on a global basis with growing levels of government involvement and assistance. Such companies realize that to be successful, they will have to better understand the geopolitical world they operate in and cope with the domestic as well as the global competitors they face in each chosen market, which in some cases include local governments. They will need better business intelligence and security capabilities than most currently possess if they're to survive and succeed. I believe you can see why intelligence organizations will be playing a greater role in both worlds, public and private, with an increasing amount of overlapping intelligence interest. Both private sector and government entities will have growing interest in geopolitical affairs. Multinational corporations' concerns about government activities affecting trade and monetary are strong but will grow. Joint interest in the new and emerging intelligence topics of cybersecurity, intellectual property threats, and supply chain viability will grow internationally. and both communities will share mutual concerns for the threats posed by international terrorism. Preparing intelligence professionals for such a future world with better skills, greater real-world experience, and the ability to work together in public-private partnerships will be a challenge for both public and private sector intelligence educators. Let me speak a little bit to preparing for that future. I'm going to conclude with some observations and remarks on the types of intelligence professionals that I believe will be needed to address this future intelligence world, and some comments on the education and training they will need. The educational aspects of this will be a bit sketchy. I will leave its professional development to educators such as yourselves. First of all, analysts. Yes, both communities will require analysts, but each with new and different types of skills. Government analysts with business skills, enhanced by real-world experience, and business intelligence analysts with greater understanding of international and geopolitical affairs. Open source intelligence and information service professionals. These are the new types of modern-day librarians that are necessary to fully exploit the growing number of international databases and syndicated information services. These professionals are a combination of library science and information services experts. Some of the best have come from the ranks of the Special Library Association, but they too needed intelligence training before they could become business intelligence analysts. Knowledge technologists, something that Mercyhurst has highlighted. Peter Drucker's blue-collar workers of the knowledge worker age. The tech-savvy computer science experts that both intelligence communities will need to fully exploit the internet world and apply all the advanced analytical software that will be available. They will be needed for both intelligence production and counterintelligence. Cybersecurity will be one of their specialties. Human intelligence. This profession will continue to play its critical role in government intelligence operations and will increase in importance in business intelligence, where it has only played a limited role up until now. A recent SCIP survey revealed that less than 3% of the CI professionals worked in the field of human intelligence gathering full-time. The private sector needs to substantially increase its professional development in the human field. Counterintelligence professionals. This group of intelligence officers will play an increasingly important role in both the government and the business worlds. As a country's national security becomes more dependent upon its economic well-being, the protection of both industrial and financial resources from foreign government intelligence and criminal threats will become national priorities. Government counterintelligence officers are better prepared for this new challenge, but will need better education about the private sector's current capabilities and limitations to protect corporate intellectual property and trade secrets. And although business professionals are fairly good at traditional security and patent protection tasks, few have the counterintelligence training necessary to protect their intellectual property and keep personnel from hostile intelligence services. Intelligence managers. Management training for intelligence professionals is an area that I believe has largely been overlooked. During my time in the government, it was primarily governed by the Peter Principle. You were promoted to your level of incompetence. There were some leadership courses and some senior level seminars provided as you rose in the ranks. There were some academic sabbaticals. I'm not sure how that's changed today. The business intelligence community has very little to offer as far as formal intelligence management training. I personally believe corporations would benefit greatly from such education. And lastly, I strongly believe the users of intelligence, both government officials and business executives, need formal intelligence education, what it is and how to use it. I believed this when I was in the government, and I still do. The private sector probably needs it more because there are few good role models or experienced users of intelligence around to learn from. It's pretty much spy novels and movies out there. Intelligence is not taught as a management discipline at any university that I'm aware of, as a management discipline. The education and training of these intelligence professionals going forward will be a challenge to all of us. Preparing them for the types of intelligence world I described earlier will require new and innovative thinking. And like the Marine Corps example I cited, creative thinking about the kind of world the next generation of intelligence professionals will have to operate in. It's not too early to start thinking and preparing for that educational task. I hope my remarks here today will cause some of you to begin that process here today. I would like to hear from you if you have any comments, certainly any questions, but I would like to have us start thinking about this task going forward.
This is a recital hall. The acoustics here are very good, and we're not going to attempt to pass microphones around. So if you have a question, raise your hand, but you're going to have to speak up so that we can hear you down here. Question?
Jan, thank you for your presentation. My name is Dick Herrick from American Military Universities. I have two questions. The first one's for you, Kevin. The first one would be, you use business intelligence and competitive intelligence seemingly interchangeably. Now, there can be a lot in the name, and I actually researched this online, and there were some subtle differences between the two. Is there a preferred name for this discipline? Are the differences important? What should we call it? Because both terms, as you know, are used. The second question is human. Can you give some examples about how you would see human used in business intelligence, perhaps on the overt side, and if you intended this on the clandestine side?
Business and embedded intelligence are essentially interchangeable. In the early 1990s, IBM started trying to grab back the term business intelligence to become data mining, but it had been used back in the 70s and 80s as a means of differentiating business from government intelligence. But it's important to define that to your audience. Do you mean that business intelligence, embedded intelligence, essentially the same? You ought to tell them that. And I do, interchangeably. As far as human is concerned, when I went to Motorola in the early 1980s, the only person that I hired from my old government experience was a fellow who had been running domestic collection. He knew how to talk to business people, he knew how to talk to academics, and I brought him into Motorola so he could talk to engineers, human resources people. We had 100,000 employees worldwide, and all we had to do was find some way to get them to share what they had learned in the marketplace about the competition back with us. And we essentially, he worked at it very diligently. At the end of the first year, he had talked to over 1,000 people in the company, saying, you know, these are what my requirements are, and what can I do to help you? And at the end of the day, we were getting about 2% response, and that wasn't enough. There were 2 people out there that he'd talked to that would send us information based on, you know, their initiative. He came up with a little training program to sort of teach them, you know, how to elicit information. You know, all from business people now. This is not clandestine. This is very overt. And what our requirements were. My job was to figure out some way to kind of get management behind it. And so he came up with the training program. I wrote what I call the chairman's Christmas letter. And so for any of those 2% that sent us a little report that was positive and we could use it either in sales or maybe in some technology field, I would essentially write the letter, have the chairman send it, and he would send it back to this individual. And that was enough to kind of get the word out that the stuff was getting to the top. And the next year, we were getting 10% response. And it was probably too much out of 100,000. But the important thing was, it was just like having national intelligence topics. We had topics that the corporation needed reporting on. We called them key intelligence topics. And a little training, a little incentive, and the legal, ethical gathering of intelligence turned out to be a very, very positive program. I carried Motorola's intelligence program for 18 months, just on the basis of one-page reports coming from human sources all around the world, until my analytical capabilities came up to what I call professional level. So, yes, human intelligence. We just don't do much training right now. Alan?
I really want to add a couple of comments to what Anna just said. In some small way, I have some similar experience. The term business intelligence, I have found, still carries more of a connotation of buy my software and you'll be able to do business intelligence. So without using another as a term of art. The other point I would emphasize is in terms of human. The most productive way to introduce humans, I have found, into a corporation, one of them improve the CI capability, is to introduce a training program in interview techniques. How to understand the impressions you and other people are making on you, and how to develop a relationship with them based on mutual interest and therefore exchange of information. Now, that raises the question we also raised of when do you do it openly and when do you do it clandestinely. I would point out that Skip is very strong on the ethical issue. If you can't turn your grandmother about it comfortably, then you're doing something wrong. There is good evidence.
Depends who your grandmother is.
Well, but let me just finish up with one quick thought, and that is I lost it.
That's the grandmother.
It happens to us old guys.
Over and clandestine. Oh, yes. If you're doing something clandestine, you're not doing CI. You're doing that sort of thing.
The business competitive intelligence thing is interesting. I find that the higher up you go in a corporation, senior management prefers to call it business intelligence because it's more than just the competitive. And so a compromise isn't bad. I've used this in my government experience, and I've also used it in private sector. Just call it business competitive intelligence. It does the job. Yes, sir.
And trying to build bridges between business and intelligence. We've been talking, Carl, about putting intelligence into business, and perhaps equally important in terms of accomplishing this is to bring business into intelligence. And I'm thinking about two particular things. One is throughout all of the academic disciplines. It seems to me that the business people have the most nuanced understanding of relationships of all kinds between individuals, between organizations, and that would be tremendously valuable and useful in intelligence and hasn't been brought in yet. And closely related to that is organizational design, which is taking that understanding and making an organization development. So maybe if that were enhanced, they might be more interested in having intelligence and business.
I think both communities have a lot to learn from each other, and I think you put your finger on it. By getting the two communities into the same room and letting them learn, or in some cases share information between each other, there's just a lot to be gained there. I know I was surprised that in the U.S. intelligence community, strategic planning is not as good as I thought it would be, but they can learn a lot from the corporate world. They do strategic planning very well. And one of the things that we found was that in the business world, the objective is to find opportunities. That's the reason we're gathering the intelligence. We're looking, we see the threat, but we're looking to see whether there's an opportunity in that threat that we, from a business standpoint, we can exploit. The governments, for the most part, are looking only at the threat side. And yet there's opportunities in there, whether they're diplomatic or in some cases there might be economic. But I think it's very important in an educational setting to try to get these two communities talking and sitting down together. I like that. Yes, sir.
And you talked about training of managers, and there have been attempts to do that. In the government, there was a program called the Intelligence Community Officers Course, But efforts like that in government seem to have a half-life of about 5 years, and then they die out for one reason or another. However, the University of Maryland University College does have an MS in Management degree focused on intelligence activities, which I believe is unique anywhere in the world.
That's good, because I think the private sector can certainly learn from it. They have to. Yes, sir.
Bill Springer, National College University, also the chair of the Washington area chapter of IAFIE. I was going to follow up with what Peter said and put in a plug. At NIU, we have a new certificate program in leadership and management. And Barry Zumoff, our ODNI chair, is here and can tell you everything you want to know about that particular program. I'm not sure if it would meet the qualifications you mentioned for having a full-blown program on intelligence management, but we do realize the need for that at our level, and since we teach people from all military services and all the agencies of the intelligence community, I think it's a good place to plant a certificate program like that, and Barry will give you more information on that if you'd like to have.
I appreciate it very much, because I think the private sector could use that as a model to start with. Actually. Yes, sir.
Bill Stanton, Maryland University. In your view, how well do you think the business community is coming to grips with the insider threat problem?
Not too good. The companies that hire former FBI counterintelligence officers to run their security, like DuPont, do it superbly well. The others, they're just trying. They really, without a professionally trained counterintelligence officer in that position, you just don't see it. It's, and I know I've worked in both communities, and you can look at the same set of facts and you don't see it if you don't have a counterintelligence perspective. So that's why we do need some training in security on counterintelligence in the private sector, and it would be very helpful to start in that. Good point. Yes, sir.
Chairman, I have been at Kentucky University.
California.
Just a comment, I've had quite a few individuals in our doctoral program, DSS, that are coming there from the business intelligence background perspective. They want to get that kind of exposure to the full intelligence community process, and they're finding it difficult to find in many places. My point, though, is that the critical comment that many of them are making is the lack of understanding of the individual human aspect of bias and inside analysis. And that there are really no places that are incorporating the aspect of neuropsychology into the overall introductory aspect. Using a quote from Sun Tzu, you don't need to yourself to be ranking. Well, you have to know yourself both in terms of technical and operational capabilities, but also in terms of cognitive competence.
Fair enough, fair enough. The business community is a little more fortunate than the government community is concerned, because corporations are there, and oftentimes we trade employees. It isn't quite like looking inside North Korea, where you really have a hard time figuring out what is going on. A lot more quantitative data available to us in the private sector. I think our analysis community is a little stronger than I know it's a lot stronger than our human gathering of intelligence is concerned. So I think both communities could certainly benefit from joint training and some actual exchanges of people. That'd be great.
Take one more question. Okay. Thank you very much, Jan.